She didn't come to steal. She only needed a bar of soap. But when an old black woman is dragged into the back room of a store like a common thief, everything changes. For her, for those who humiliated her, and for the world that watched. What began as a quiet trip for necessities turns into a moment that forces a forgotten soul to finally speak and be seen. This story will shake you. Welcome to the channel. Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe as we dive into this heartbreaking, powerful journey. The morning light leaked through the dusty blinds, casting long, pale stripes across the worn-out carpet. A kettle hissed on the stove, and the faded calendar on the fridge still clung to last month's date. In the silence of the cramped apartment, the ticking wall clock sounded like a drumbeat, echoing through rooms once filled with laughter, now only haunted by memory. Mama Ebel sat on the edge of her bed, tying her scarf with slow fingers. Her joints ached from the rain, or maybe just from the years. 73, but the world moved as though she didn't exist. Her fingers lingered on the soft fabric, a faded Ankara cloth patterned with golden peacocks. She used to save such cloth for parties. Now it was what she wore to go buy soap. She shuffled to the kitchen, opened the cupboard, and stared at the near-empty shelf. A single packet of rice, half-used salt, and a tin of tomato paste. Her eyes shifted to the bathroom, where a sliver of soap, thinner than a coin, clung to the edge of the sink. Ebel picked it up gently, wrapped it in toilet paper, and placed it in the trash. "Only one left," she whispered to herself, as though confessing a secret. Her voice cracked at the end. She stood still for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around her. Her thoughts wandered far, past oceans, to Lagos, where she used to walk to the market holding her husband's hand. Where neighbors knew her name, where everyone looked like her, spoke like her, understood her. But here, in the land she once believed held promise, she had become invisible. She checked her coin purse. Just enough to buy a bar of soap and maybe a small loaf of bread if she skipped lunch. Outside, the wind was cold and unfriendly. It wasn't winter, but the chill felt personal, like the air itself rejected her presence. She pulled her coat tighter, headscarf fluttering slightly in the breeze as she walked the familiar route to the store. People passed her without acknowledgement. She nodded at a passing young couple, and they looked through her. Her reflection in the pharmacy window startled her, stooped, aging, eyes sunken with exhaustion. She no longer recognized the woman in the glass. Inside the store, the bright fluorescent lights flickered, humming a low, grating tune. Mama Ebel walked slowly through the aisles, weaving between shelves lined with items she once used freely but now treated like luxury. She paused in front of the soaps. So many kinds. Bright packaging, loud scents, lemon burst, ocean breeze, lavender calm. Her fingers trembled as she picked one up. She turned it over, checking the price tag. $3. Her face fell. She reached into her coat pocket and brought out the small cloth coin purse. After counting and recounting, her total came to $2.37. She sighed. Then she looked around. There were no attendants nearby, just two boys in the chip aisle arguing about flavors and a man sneezing in the cold medicine section. Her hand slipped the soap into her purse, not out of malice, not to steal, but just to hold on to it for a moment, to decide. To weigh whether her dignity could allow her to return it to the shelf if she couldn't afford it. "I'll just check the price at the counter," she mumbled under her breath, already ashamed of the thought. She walked toward the bakery section, hoping to make up her mind before reaching the register. Maybe she could explain. Maybe they'd understand. But just as she turned the corner, a hand gripped her arm. A firm, unfamiliar hand. "Excuse me, ma'am. You need to come with us." Two security guards, one older and pale with a sneer, the other young and black with an uncertain frown, stood beside her. The younger one wouldn't meet her eyes. She blinked in confusion. "Sorry? What is wrong?" The older guard reached into her purse without asking. Her voice caught in her throat as she watched him pull out the soap, holding it up like a trophy. "This yours?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, confused, ashamed, breathless. I was going to pay. I just wanted to check. You didn't scan it. We've got it on camera. Come with us. People turned. An old man by the fruits watched. A mother with a toddler stared. A teenage girl pulled out her phone. And Mama Ebel, once a schoolteacher in Nigeria, once a dancer at family parties, once the matriarch who hosted every holiday, stood in the middle of the store, trembling, as if the ground had opened beneath her. I just needed soap, she whispered. Not as an excuse, not as an argument, just the truth, aching and raw. They led her to the back of the store, past rows of cereal and cereal boxes with smiling cartoon faces. Past a child who asked, "Mommy, what did she do?" Back into a small room with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and walls the color of ash. She sat, but her spirit stood frozen outside. 20 minutes earlier, she'd been folding laundry, humming an old Igbo tune. She'd taken pride in having raised 2 children here. Her son, Samuel, worked for the city's IT department. Her daughter, Nena, was a nurse. They called once in a while, sometimes for money, sometimes just to say, "Hi, Mama, just checking in." But it wasn't the same. They were American now. Not Nigerian. Not fully. They didn't Ifo Rairo anymore. They didn't understand why she still wore her wrappers to church, or why she spoke to herself in Igbo while cooking. They called her extra. They didn't understand that her culture wasn't a costume. It was her skin, her soul. And now here she was, in a room where they questioned her like a thief. Her palms were wet. Her voice was gone. She felt like screaming, but her upbringing held it in. Respect, dignity, decency. These were the things she'd carried across the ocean, but in this moment, they felt like weighty chains around her voice. The young black employee walked in slowly, holding a clipboard. He looked at her, really looked this time. His eyes softened. "You remind me of my grandma," he said quietly. Mama Ebel's throat tightened. He didn't say anything else. Just slipped her a napkin and left the room. Later, they let her go with a warning. No charges. Just embarrassment. Her name not written down, but her dignity stained. Forever. She didn't buy the soap. She walked home with empty hands and heavy feet. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Inside her apartment, the silence roared louder than the city outside. She poured hot water into a mug and sat by the window. Her tea bag floated, untouched. From her drawer, she pulled out a small box wrapped in a cloth. Inside were photos from home, her wedding day, her mother holding her first child, and a soap wrapper from a brand they used to buy back in Nigeria. She kept it, folded neatly, like a memory you're too afraid to let go. She pressed it against her cheek and began to cry. Not loud. Not messy. Just steady tears that rolled down and fell silently into her lap. She looked out the window. Cars passed. People walked. The world spun. But inside, time stood still with an old woman who only needed soap and to be seen. The night was long. Mama Ebel didn't sleep much, and when she did, the dreams felt heavy. In one of them, she was standing in front of her old home in Enugu, barefoot, staring at her mother's garden, but it was covered in snow. The hibiscus had frozen. She woke with a jolt and stared at the ceiling, trying to shake the cold that had followed her from sleep. Morning came with a drizzle tapping softly at the window. The air in the apartment smelled like stale bread and eucalyptus oil. She sat by the edge of her bed, still in yesterday's wrapper, her scarf half slipped from her graying hair. Her fingers absently rubbed the outline of the cross stitched into her headscarf, a gift from her late husband Obinna. A bar of soap. That was all. That one mistake now clung to her like sweat, even in the chill of dawn. She moved slowly to the bathroom and stood before the mirror. Her reflection stared back without expression. The woman looking at her wore sorrow on her face like powder, light, but impossible to miss. She turned on the tap and splashed her face. Cold water. No warmth in the pipes anymore. She searched the corners of the sink for the old sliver of soap but remembered, she had thrown it away. She hesitated, then reached for the body wash her daughter had brought months ago. It smelled like artificial mango and bleach. American smells. Plastic smells. She squeezed just a drop and whispered, "Forgive me," as though her ancestors were watching. In the kitchen, she poured hot water into her cup and stirred it with nothing. No sugar. No milk. Just warmth to hold on to. Then came the knock. 3 sharp taps. She froze. Another knock, louder this time. She opened the door slowly. It was Mrs. Delgado, her neighbor from across the hall. A Puerto Rican widow who always smiled too much and spoke too fast. "Morning, Mama Ebel," she said, arms crossed, lips pursed with concern. "Are you okay? I saw you yesterday, coming back. You looked not okay." Ebel managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, thank you." Mrs. Delgado didn't move. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's what we all say when we're not fine." They stood in silence for a moment. "I made arroz con leche," Mrs. Delgado finally said, lifting a small container. "You need to eat. Can I come in?" Ebel nodded, stepping aside. They sat at the table in quiet companionship, the only sound being the soft hum of the refrigerator. Ebel stirred the rice pudding slowly. She didn't touch it. "Something happened, didn't it?" Delgado asked, softer this time. Ebel opened her mouth, then closed it. After a moment, she whispered, "They said I stole. At the store." Delgado gasped. "Steal? I didn't." Ebel looked down at her hands. "I held the soap. I didn't scan it. But I didn't mean to take it. I was ashamed. I didn't have enough." Delgado reached over and gently touched her arm. Ebel's eyes brimmed. "I just needed soap." Later that afternoon, Ebel sat on the balcony of her apartment, watching children play in the puddles below. She remembered when her own children played like that, laughing, chasing each other through the open streets of Suralire. Her daughter used to run barefoot in the rain until Obina scooped her up, pretending to be angry. Those days felt like a different lifetime. A softer world. One where she mattered. She looked down at her hands again. They were cracked. She hadn't noticed how rough they had become. The shame wasn't just from the soap. It was deeper than that. It was from years of pretending. Of acting like she was doing okay. Of avoiding food banks on days her neighbors might see her. Of speaking slowly, clearly, so Americans wouldn't mock her accent. Of smiling too quickly in elevators, so white women wouldn't clutch their purses. Every little humiliation, every quiet compromise, it built up, brick by brick, into a wall she didn't know how to climb anymore. That evening, she called her daughter. "Nena," she said softly when the line picked up. "Hi, Mama. I'm at work. Everything okay?" Ebel hesitated. "Can I ask just small help?" A sigh came through the line. "Mama, again? I only need little. For soap." Her voice cracked. Nena's tone shifted. "You need money for soap? Mama, why didn't you say this earlier? You know I have the kids, bills, and Kofi's school fees. I can't keep covering everything." "I know. Ebel began, but Nena cut her off. "Look, I'll send something. But Mama, you need to learn to budget better. You've lived here long enough to know how things work. You can't keep doing this." Ebel swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." The line went dead. She sat there holding the phone long after the call ended, her fingers trembling. Later, as night settled, she opened her drawer and pulled out her old Bible. Inside were folded letters, some from home, some from friends now gone, one from Obina, written just before his death. She read his words for the 100th time. Asterisk, "My dearest Ebel, even when the world forgets us, may you never forget who you are. The storm will pass. And you, my lioness, will rise." Her tears returned, this time heavier, deeper. She cried for the soap. For her dignity. For the way Nena had spoken to her. For the years lost. For her reflection in the store mirror. For all the time she had bitten her tongue when she wanted to scream. But as the sobs quieted, something stirred. Not anger. Resolve. The next morning, she looked at her face in the mirror again. Yes, the wrinkles were deeper, the skin looser, but behind the tired eyes was a flicker of something else. Old, buried pride that had been trampled by years of silence. She reached into her wardrobe and pulled out a wrapper she hadn't worn in over a decade, bright green with gold embroidery. It still smelled like cedarwood and shea butter. She laid it on the bed. Then she opened her coin purse. Still light. But her spirit? Heavier than it had been in years. She folded her hands and whispered in Igbo, "If this land will not see me, I will make them." Outside, the morning sun broke through the gray clouds. Tomorrow she would return to that store. Not for soap. For something more. The glass doors of the supermarket hissed open again. Mama Ebel stepped inside, this time draped in her brightest traditional wrapper, bold green laced with red and gold. Her scarf was tied high, her posture straighter than it had been in months. She wasn't just a customer anymore. She was a woman with something to reclaim. But as the fluorescent lights washed over her and the sterile chill of the air conditioning hit her skin, a flood of memory returned. The feel of that security guard's hand on her arm. The judgment in the manager's eyes. The way people had stared like she was a thief. A joke. A warning. She took a deep breath and kept walking. Her sandals clacked against the tile floor. Each step echoed louder than it should have. A mother turned and looked her up and down. A stock boy paused mid-cart, eyes lingering. Even without saying a word, the store remembered her. And it watched. She moved past the cereal aisle slowly. Her hands remained by her side. She didn't dare touch a thing. Not this time. She reached the soap aisle and stood for a moment in silence. Dozens of brands. Hundreds of choices. But none of them could wash away what had happened. None of them could clean the stain of humiliation still etched into her memory. She didn't pick anything up. Didn't come to buy. She came to face it. "Ma'am?" A voice broke her trance. It was the young black employee from the other day. The one who had whispered, "You remind me of my grandma." He looked nervous but sincere. "I saw the video," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Someone recorded what happened. It's all over TikTok now. People are talking." Ebel's brow furrowed. "Video?" He nodded. "Some girl filmed it when security stopped you. It's gone viral. People are mad. Saying it's racism. Saying the store should apologize." Ebel's heart skipped. Not because of fame, but because her pain had become someone's entertainment. "I didn't want this," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I know," the young man replied. "But maybe it's good people are seeing it. Seeing you." He looked down, unsure what to say next. Before he left, he gently added, "You shouldn't have been treated that way. I'm sorry." Minutes later, she was called to the manager's office. Same white man as before. Slick back hair. Cold, tired eyes. "Mrs. Ebel," he began, not even trying to pronounce it properly, "I wanted to extend our apologies for the incident the other day." She sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He continued, "We've reviewed the footage. While our staff were following protocol, we understand how the situation may have felt unpleasant. Corporate has asked us to offer you a gift card and a formal letter of apology." He slid a small envelope across the table like it was hush money. Ebel didn't move. "Thank you," she said slowly, "but I didn't come for your card." The manager blinked. "I came for your eyes." He frowned. "I don't understand." "I want you to look at me," she said firmly. "Not like I'm a criminal. Not like I don't belong. Look at me like a woman. Like someone who's lived a full life. Like someone who has paid taxes in this country for 30 years. I came to be seen." He stared at her. Then blinked again. Clearly uncomfortable. Ebel stood. "This skin is not a sin," she said softly, voice steady. "You will not make me ashamed of it." Then she left the office, envelope untouched. Outside, The parking lot pulsed with the buzz of midday sun. The sky was clearer now, the wind gentler. Her scarf fluttered again, but this time, she let it dance. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she spotted a group of high school girls standing by the entrance, whispering. One of them approached. "Excuse me," the girl said, holding up her phone. "Are you the woman from the video?" Ebel paused, wary. The girl smiled. "You were amazing. My grandma cried when she saw it. She said you reminded her of her sister. She said, 'Thank you.'" Ebel's mouth parted slightly, unsure what to say. But she nodded once, eyes glassy. The girl took a photo with her, then returned to her friends. And just like that, a ripple began. That night, the apartment was quiet again, but not as heavy. Something had lifted. She placed a new bar of soap on the edge of the sink, not the expensive kind, but hers. Bought with her own money. No shame attached. She turned off the lights and walked to the window. Cars passed. The city breathed. In the reflection of the glass, she saw herself. Not just the old woman. Not just the immigrant. Not just the accused. But someone who had survived. Someone who had spoken. Yet not all peace lasts. The phone rang. It was her son, Samuel. "Mama, what is this I'm seeing online?" he asked, his voice hard. "You made a scene in a store? Now everyone's tagging me in videos, messaging me about you." Ebel's chest tensed. "I didn't make a scene," she said calmly. "They did. You embarrassed us." I stood up. "For what?" "For myself." Silence. Then the line went dead. She sat back in her chair. Pain pulsed gently beneath her ribs, not sharp, but aching, like a bruise you forget is there until touched. Her hand moved slowly over her chest, over her heart. This was the cost. Sometimes when you stand, you lose something. But sometimes you gain something greater. She didn't know which this would be. Not yet. But she would not shrink again. The sky outside Mama Ebel's apartment had turned the color of wet ash. It wasn't raining yet, but the clouds carried a heaviness, thick, low, waiting to burst. Inside, the apartment was dim. Not because there were no lights, but because she hadn't bothered to turn any on. Some days, the shadows were easier than the truth. She sat at her small kitchen table, the one with one leg slightly shorter than the rest, rocking just a little whenever she leaned her elbow too far forward. A half-empty cup of tea sat cooling beside her. She wasn't drinking it. She was just staring. The TV was on in the background, but she wasn't watching. It murmured a game show, laughter, music, but none of it touched her. She opened the drawer beside her, the one that held more memories than utensils, and pulled out a small worn box wrapped in fabric that used to be part of her wedding blouse. Inside were items too sacred to be discarded, even though time had thinned them. A faded photo of her on her wedding day, grinning beside Obinna, his wide shoulders wrapped in a white agbada. A dried flower, pressed between old letters. A cracked bar of black soap from Nigeria. And a creased, sun-stained letter. The first one she received after moving to America. She unfolded the letter slowly, her fingers trembling as though the ink still held warmth. Asterisk, Ebel my star, I hope the sky in America is as bright as the one above our family home. You are brave. You carry all of us with you. Never forget who you are, asterisk. Her lips quivered. Her eyes filled. She had carried so much. Too much. And now? She couldn't carry herself. The clock ticked. The wind began to whisper outside, rustling the brittle blinds. Somewhere downstairs, a baby cried. Somewhere next door, someone slammed a cupboard. She picked up her phone and dialed. Nena. Her daughter answered after a few rings, her voice brisk, distracted. Mama, I'm at the clinic. Is it urgent? Ebel hesitated. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say my heart is heavy, or I just needed to hear your voice, or do you remember who I was before you stopped looking? But instead, she said softly, I just wanted to say hello. The pause. Then a sigh. Mama, you can't keep calling during work. Please understand, The line went quiet, and then it clicked off. Ebel sat still for a moment, the phone still pressed against her cheek. Even her daughter no longer had room for her voice. Later that evening, she lit a small candle in front of Obina's photo. The flickering light cast dancing shadows across his smiling face. It was the last photo they took together before he died. The hospital gown looked strange on him, like it didn't belong to someone so proud. She leaned in close. "Obina, I'm trying," she whispered in Igbo. "But this land is hard." Her fingers traced the edges of the photo. "They don't know me here. Not the way you did. Not the way we knew each other, under our roof, with jollof on the stove and gospel playing on the radio." Her voice cracked. "I am invisible here, even to our own children." The silence between her words was deafening. She wandered back to her room, aching with a hollowness that had no name. The door to the closet creaked as she opened it. Inside were rows of wrappers and dresses she hadn't worn in years, fabrics with stories woven into every thread. One was the blue lace she wore when she arrived in America. Another, a mustard gelly she had worn to Nena's graduation, back when Nena still clung to her hand like a vine to a fence. She pulled out an Ankara blouse, one Obina always said made her look like royalty. She held it close to her nose. Still faintly smelled of camphor and wood smoke. She wrapped it around her and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. Hours passed. Darkness deepened. But she couldn't sleep. So she turned to her Bible. The pages were frayed, corners turned, entire passages underlined with fading blue ink. She found Psalm 71, the one her mother used to read when she felt overlooked. Asterisk, "Do not cast me away when I am old. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone." She read it aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Then again, and again, each time slower, each time like a cry, not a prayer. At some point, she drifted into sleep, but her dreams gave her no rest. She was in a white room, cold, silent. She stood barefoot. Soap crumbled in her hands. Everyone was watching, but no one came close. Her children were behind glass, older, foreign. They stared but didn't recognize her. She tried to call out, but her voice was gone. She woke up shaking, a dampness on her forehead. Morning had come. She shuffled into the kitchen. The sun cut across the tiles in quiet beams. She stood at the window and looked out at the street below. Two boys were laughing, tossing a basketball. A woman in a hijab pushed a stroller. Life moved on, as if she didn't exist. But something had changed in her. The silence had screamed too long. She wouldn't disappear. Not like this. She would remember who she was, even if the world didn't. Later that day, she sat at her table again. She began writing. A letter. Not to her children. Not to the store. But to herself. "Dear Ebel, you are not the shame they tried to hang on your shoulders. You are the voice of your mother, your grandmother, the women who prayed through wars and wept at births. You are the one who crossed oceans, who buried a husband with grace, who held on to faith even when the light went out. You are not invisible. You are home even when the land refuses to open its doors. Speak again. Speak until they listen. Asterisk, speak until you believe." And just as she finished, there was a knock at the door. 3 times. Chirp. From. She hesitated, then opened it. A young woman stood there, early 20s, holding a phone in one hand and tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said breathlessly. "Are you the woman from the video?" Ebel blinked. "Yes," she said, uncertain. The young woman's voice cracked. "You reminded me of my mother. She passed 2 years ago. I saw what they did to you and her breath hitched. I just wanted to say, thank you." And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, Ebel didn't feel so alone. She sits again by the window, the soap resting on the bathroom sink, untouched but present. Her reflection in the glass is still aged, still tired, but something in her gaze is different now. Not angry, not broken, just awake. as if something long buried had opened its eyes. The sun barely pushed its light through the grimy glass of the small apartment window. It was quiet now, eerily quiet. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the type that settles after a storm, like the world is still holding its breath. Mabel sat at her modest dining table, a mug of lukewarm tea cupped between trembling fingers. The tea had long gone cold, but she didn't notice. Her thoughts weren't in the room anymore. They were still trapped back in that store, that cold room, that moment she'd been stripped of dignity. Her face was tired. Not the tiredness that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind that builds over years, after countless moments of being overlooked, misunderstood, misjudged. She had raised 3 boys in a world that never made room for their dreams. She had buried one. And now, at 72, the world wanted to bury her spirit too. The video had gone viral. It wasn't her choice. Some teenager had recorded the final minutes, the trembling woman standing her ground against uniformed accusers. Her voice cracked but fierce, her words unforgettable. "You think I'm just a thief, don't you? But I built this country with my hands, and now I'm nothing but a suspect." It lit up the internet. Hashtags popped up overnight. # justice for Mabel. # she needed soap. # not a thief. Strangers began defending her. People who never knew her name were suddenly sharing her pain. But not everyone was kind. The comments were split. Some uplifted her, but others tore into her like wolves. "She's playing the race card again. She's just mad she got caught. If she's poor, that's not our problem." It wasn't just the words that stung. It was the fact that they didn't see her, not the woman who used to teach Sunday school. Not the widow who cleaned hotel bathrooms for 25 years so her kids could eat. Not the woman who once marched in Selma, barefoot, beside her father. They just saw the headline, "Old Black Woman Accused of Theft in Local Store." Later that morning, her doorbell rang. Twice. She didn't answer at first. But then it rang again, and this time it was followed by a soft knock. Gentle. Almost respectful. Through the peephole, she saw a tall, broad-shouldered young black man in a beige jacket. He wasn't a cop. That was her first relief. When she opened the door, he didn't introduce himself the way most people did. No hurried words, no microphone in her face. He just looked at her with eyes full of something she hadn't seen in a long time. Humility. "My name's Andre," he said quietly. "I'm a reporter for an independent black news outlet. We don't do clickbait. We tell stories, the real kind. Can I talk to you? Just you, Miss Mabel. No angles." She hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside slowly. Andre sat on her old couch, surrounded by faded photo frames and the smell of shea butter. His notebook remained untouched beside him. He wasn't here for a scoop. He was here to listen. Mabel started slow, talking about her childhood in Alabama. Picking cotton with her mama. Watching the first black bus driver in town. Losing her brother in Vietnam. Falling in love with David, her husband, her best friend. Then motherhood, widowhood, hardship. Always walking with her head up, even when her back hurt from cleaning floors. And then through the store. So, the humiliation. By the time she finished, her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. Andre finally spoke carefully. "You know what struck me, Miss Mabel? You kept saying, 'I was just tired.' But the truth is, the world's been tired of you. Tired of old black women with too much wisdom and not enough wealth. You're dangerous to the system because you remember, and because you still hope." Mabel blinked. The room was quiet again, but this time, it didn't feel empty. "You have the right," he continued, "to be seen. And if you let me, I want to tell your story the right way. Not just the store incident. A few days later, the story published. It was titled, "Mabel Didn't Just Need Soap, She Needed to Be Heard." And people listened. The article painted her with depth, her sacrifices, her integrity, her history. Community groups reached out. A local pastor invited her to speak at his church. A retired judge sent her a letter apologizing on behalf of a world that never made room for her grace. But even with all that attention, Mabel didn't feel healed. Not yet. Because beneath the waves of support, the pain still sat in her like a bruise that hadn't faded. And she wasn't sure what to do with it. Until a knock came on her door again. Only this time, it wasn't a journalist. It was Keisha, the store manager. The same woman who had watched Mabel be taken to that back room, who had stood silent when Mabel cried out that she didn't steal anything. The same woman who turned her back when Mabel was accused without evidence. Keisha looked shaken. Her voice wavered. "I've been thinking about you every day. I should have spoken up. I didn't. I'm sorry." Mabel stared at her. "You were scared," Mabel said quietly. "Yes," Keisha admitted. "But that's no excuse. I was afraid of losing my job, but you lost something more. You lost trust in all of us. And you deserved better." A long pause followed. Mabel stood still, her fingers curled slightly at her side. The words she wanted to say burned behind her lips, but which ones? Anger? Forgiveness? Both? Finally she said, "You know what hurts most? You and I, we share the same history. We carry the same blood. But in that room, you looked at me like they did." Keisha swallowed, her shoulders sagging. "I know. And I have to live with that." Silence stretched again. Then Mabel stepped back and opened the door a little wider. "Come in." Inside, the two women sat, drinking tea, not speaking much. Just breathing. Just existing in the same space. One older, one younger, both scarred in different ways by the same system. And then Keisha asked, "What now? What do you want to do next?" Mabel's eyes drifted to the window, where birds hopped along the railing. "I think," she said slowly, "I want to teach again. Not in a school. Just teach life. Teach what they never printed in books." "You should," Keisha replied. "People are ready to listen now." But just as Mabel began to feel like maybe the corner had turned, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaking. It was Andre. "Mabel, we need to talk. Someone from corporate just leaked an internal memo. The store knew you didn't steal. They had the footage. But they decided to keep it quiet." Mabel's hand trembled. "So, they watched me suffer on purpose?" "Yes," Andre said quietly. "They were afraid of a lawsuit. Thought it'd blow over." She dropped the phone gently on the table. And then, for the first time in years, she stood up straight. "They think I'm just some old woman with no power," she muttered. Keisha looked up, wide-eyed. "What are you thinking?" Mabel's eyes narrowed. "I'm thinking it's time I remind them who I am." The world had now seen her. But not the her that smiled quietly at the bus driver each morning. Not the her that wiped the face of a sleeping grandchild. Not the her who cooked stews from memory and grief. No, the world had seen that version of her, arms trembling, eyes glassy, voice cracking as she whispered, "I just needed soap." Mama Essie sat in her living room as the screen flickered with her own face. And again. Newscasters debated. Commentators dissected. Strangers demanded justice. Some offered praise, others spat criticism. Some swore she was brave. Others said she played victim. Her name, her face, her pain, viral. Yet there she was, sitting alone in the same green plastic chair by the window, tea untouched in her lap, staring blankly as anchors with perfect teeth said her name like it belonged to them. Eshin Adam, 69 years old, Nigerian, widow, grandmother of 4, accused of stealing soap, detained, humiliated, now a symbol. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to be left alone. The ringing phone shattered the silence. And again, church members, reporters, people who never called her when her electricity was cut or when her son was deported. They all wanted to speak to her now. She unplugged the phone. But the doorbell still rang. A knock followed. Then voices outside her window. Miss Eshin, we just want to ask, Mama Essie, how do you feel about? Do you have a message for her? She closed the curtain, her hands trembling. Her breath came in short bursts, and her knees threatened to give out beneath her. Where were all these people when she stood in the snow waiting for the bus? Where were they when her skin crawled from the subtle looks of disgust as she paid for her groceries with counted coins? Suddenly, the house felt smaller. She turned on the stove to warm her tea and felt her fingers twitch. She needed something familiar, something not tainted by the attention. She reached for the palm oil. But even that wasn't safe, because the newscaster said, "This is not the first time elderly black immigrants have faced discrimination in public spaces." And then they showed other faces, other names, other wounds. It should have made her feel seen. But all she felt was exposed. Later that night, Florence came over again. She hadn't been by since the second video went viral. The one where the security guard apologized. The one where the store's regional manager made a donation to a food bank in solidarity with seniors. Mama Essie didn't trust it. Florence walked in like someone who had just discovered fire and needed to show someone fast. "You're not going to believe this. Mama, they invited you to speak at a rally." Mama Essie didn't respond. She just stirred her tea, even though it was already cold. "They said you're the face of the movement now. You can say whatever you want. This is your chance." Chance for what? To relive the most humiliating day of her life? To explain again how she was just tired and out of soap. "I'm tired, Florence," she said quietly. Florence's enthusiasm waned. "But this could change things for us, for people like us." "People like us," Mama Essie repeated, voice hollow. "People like us are tired of being remembered only when we're bleeding." Florence lowered herself into the chair beside her. The silence between them stretched like an old wound reopening. Florence tried again, this time softer. "I think maybe your story is bigger than you, Mama. Maybe this is God's way of giving you a voice. One they can't ignore." But Mama Essie's voice had been ignored for so long that raising it now felt unnatural, like yelling into a canyon that had already swallowed too many cries. That night, she lay awake. The windows buzzed with cars passing by. In the distance, another siren. Maybe someone else accused of something they didn't do. Maybe another mother waiting up. She remembered her own mother. How she used to say, "When the wind talks, listen closely. It's not just the trees that speak." What was the wind saying now? By morning, the media frenzy had doubled. Florence forwarded an email that said a major network wanted to air a segment called Asterisk, the Soap Incident, A Nation Reacts. Mama Essie didn't reply. Instead, she walked to the community center alone. She hadn't been there in weeks. The place looked different now, new flyers, more faces, and whispers that halted the moment she entered. But one thing remained unchanged. The scent of old wood floors and the soft hum of children laughing in the daycare room. She found Auntie Bola in the back, her apron covered in flour. She was making puff-puff for a fundraiser. "You still remember how?" Bola teased. "I remember enough," Mama Essie said, rolling up her sleeves. They cooked together in silence. And it felt normal. More normal than cameras, interviews, and viral fame. But halfway through mixing, Bola glanced up and said, "You know, there are many watching you now. Young ones. Elders. They see how you carry this weight. Don't hide too long, eh?" Mama Essie nodded but didn't answer. She knew Bola was right. And it scared her. Later that evening, a package arrived at her door. No name. No return address. Inside was a bar of soap. Just one. Wrapped in cloth. And underneath it, a note written in delicate handwriting. Asterisk, "You reminded me of my mother. She never asked for much either. Thank you." Mama Essie's hands quivered as she held the soap. That was the moment something broke, and then healed. Someone, somewhere, had seen her. Not the viral her. Not the trending topic. But the woman who had walked into a store needing a small necessity and dignity. She stared at the soap as if it were sacred. It wasn't about soap anymore. It was about being worthy of humanity without having to bleed for it. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she wrote something. A letter. A message. A speech. She didn't know what to call it yet. But the words flowed like tears. And by morning, she had made a decision. She would speak. Not for the cameras. Not for the likes. But for herself. And maybe, just maybe, for the one still waiting to be seen. The courtroom was freezing, not from the temperature, but from the stares, the silence, the scrutiny. Mabel sat on the front row, hands folded, head high. Her Sunday best dress hung loose against her aging frame, but her spirit didn't sag. Cameras were pointed at her now, not to shame her but to witness her. The woman who just needed soap had become something else entirely, an unwilling symbol, a reminder, a storm. The trial had barely started, yet everything about it was already wrong. The store's lawyers spoke in smooth tones, coated with feigned concern. They called the incident a misunderstanding, a security protocol, mistake. But no one used the word humiliation. No one mentioned the trembling in Mabel's hands when she was cuffed, the coldness of the tiled floor beneath her knees, or the ache in her back from being forced to wait while people whispered and pointed. But Mabel remembered. As the judge glanced through the initial filings, her lawyer leaned closer. Fierce. Nervous. They're going to try to settle again, she whispered. They'll offer more this time. Maybe triple. Mabel looked at her, lips unmoving. No. You could take it. Buy yourself peace. Comfort. Mabel didn't answer. Comfort wasn't what she came for. Her silence stretched, thicker than the air in the courtroom. The case had already drawn national attention. A clip of her arrest had gone viral, making its way onto the screens of millions. They saw an old black woman in tears. Some felt rage. Others disbelief. But most only watched for a moment before scrolling past. Mabel hadn't scrolled past. She had watched it all. Again and again. Not just what they did to her, but what she saw in her own eyes. Not weakness, but grief. A grief that had lived too long, buried in layers of silence and endurance. She was tired of endurance. A young man was called to the stand. A former employee. He looked barely 22, hands trembling as he took the oath. He glanced at Mabel as he spoke. I was told to keep an eye on her. The manager said older people sometimes sneak things. Especially ones who looked like... He stopped. The courtroom went still. Like what? The judge asked. The young man looked down. Like her. Mabel didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Later, the store's manager testified. Polished and deflecting. He explained the system in place, the error in judgment, the tragic oversight. Never once did he say her name. To him, she was just the customer. But Mabel had a name. And it mattered. That night, she sat in her room, the city lights blinking like indifferent stars through the window. Her granddaughter, Ebony, lay sleeping beside her on the couch. She looked peaceful now, but the scars from that day at the store hadn't faded from the girl's eyes. Mabel stared at the ceiling, tears tracing quietly into her hair. She remembered Mississippi, 1954, when her own mother had been spat on in front of a courthouse. When no one listened. When Mabel, just 10, had been told to hold her tongue and keep her head down. She had done that for 70 years. And now her voice had returned. The next day, as the trial continued, a reporter asked if she had any regrets. Mabel looked straight into the lens. I regret being silent for so long. Her lawyer panicked behind her, whispering that interviews weren't advised during proceedings. But Mabel didn't care. She was done being advised. Inside the courtroom, the final statements were made. The defense lawyer, pale and tired, stood up and uttered words that curdled the air. It was Ebony who stood up first. Her voice cracked, loud and sharp. She didn't steal. She asked at the register, and they still accused her. The judge called for order. But something had already shifted in the room. A spell broken. A wall cracked. When Mabel finally rose to speak, the courtroom hushed. I didn't want soap for free. I wanted to pay, like everyone else. But you didn't see that. You saw an old black body, moving too slow, looking too poor, too small to fight back. You thought I was nothing. But I have lived. I've cleaned your schools, your homes, your hospitals. I've buried a husband. I've raised a family. I've paid taxes, watched presidents rise and fall. And I'm still here. She paused. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. You humiliated me in front of my grandchild. For a bar of soap. But the world saw it. And now you don't get to look away. The verdict came the next morning. The store was found liable for racial profiling, wrongful detainment, and emotional trauma. Damages were awarded, public apologies issued. And for the first time, someone from corporate, white, suited, and stiff, said her name in front of cameras. Mabel Thompson. And for a brief moment, that name shook something in the nation. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply went home. Ebony held her hand as they walked down the courthouse steps. Are you okay, Grandma? Mabel nodded slowly. I'm tired, baby. But I'm seen. That night, while the city slept, Mabel stood in her kitchen. Her cane leaned against the table. On the counter sat a small bag. Inside it, nothing special, just a fresh bar of soap. She opened it, unwrapped the paper, and set it on the sink. It wasn't about the soap anymore. It never was. It was about dignity. It was about being counted. And now she was. But just as the story felt like it was ending, her phone rang. Blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. A voice on the line, deep and unfamiliar, spoke gently. Mrs. Thompson, there's something you need to know. About what really happened that day. About who called it in. Mabel froze. Her grip tightened around the phone. What do you mean? The voice sighed. It wasn't random. You were targeted. The line clicked off. She stood there, the silence crashing around her. Someone wanted this to happen? And just like that, a new chapter was waiting. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful journeys that inspire, challenge, and uplift. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of hope and strength. Join our community. Your support means everything.